Knob Creek just dropped an affordable 10-year rye. Let's see how good it is. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Hutch. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the world of whiskey. So that's right, Knob Creek seems to have done it again. They really are the champions of age statements these days. So they've released this 10-year-old rye whiskey. This comes right on the heels of them putting the 7-year age statement on their rye whiskey. So I started seeing that on shelves over the last couple of months. The big 7 does kind of make it pop. So good on them for embracing that age statement. But then they go and up the ante by 3 years, giving us this almost not really talked about, or I didn't really hear rumors swirling about a 10-year rye coming from them until very recently. And now it's on shelves. So 10-year rye certainly puts it in this category of pretty dang well-aged products. They've got their 12-year bourbon, which I love, and rye tends to mature a little bit faster than bourbon, so this really does put this rye in a pretty well-aged category. What are some other stats about the bottle that's important to know? Mash bill is undisclosed, but it's rumored to be a barely legal rye, so right at that 51% rye, and maybe a more corn or bourbon presence will come through on this. We'll see. Proof point is 100 proof, so Knob Creek seems to love to sit right at that level. And then price here will vary a little bit. I think the MSRP is 70 bucks. I was actually able to get it for 60 bucks, which is crazy when you think about the amount of age and relative availability of this thing. That's pretty awesome. I mean, in my mind, I immediately go to, I've got this Michter's 10 rye that is one of my favorite bottles I've ever owned. It's 10-year-old rye, but it's 200 bucks and nearly impossible to find. And you can get something this old now with Knob Creek that's much, much cheaper, that's for sure. Of course, the real question is, how good is the actual whiskey, and is it worth your money or your effort to go out and grab sometime soon? Let's dive in and see if we can answer that question for you. All right, on the nose. Okay, so definitely fresh and fruity. Apple, big burst of apple. A little bit of a lemon tang as well. Some solid vanilla, maybe a touch of bright cherry as well. There's definitely an herbal freshness to it. A little bit creamy. Almost you can detect that just on the nose. Some mint, definitely mint. Yeah, that vanilla cream and mint is really cool. And then mixed in there is that little pop of lemon, good amount of apple. All right, let's go in on the palate, see how it tastes. Cheers. Okay, very, very good. It does present to me as kind of this barely legal borderline case here. It had a lot of oak and brown sugar, just kind of wrapping around the whole thing. So almost could mistake it for a bourbon, but then, especially on the back end of the palate and into the finish, it totally lets you know that it's a rye, and it came forward with that lemon, that almost vanilla cream, almost like vanilla ice cream, and lemon and some mint. And then a little burst of that apple was maybe toward the front end of the sip as well with that brown sugar. So kind of goes from what you could say is a bourbon, and then it really gets some of those fresh, citrusy, nice qualities of a rye. All right, now that it's on the palate, let's take a second sip, see if we can pick out some more flavors. Cheers. All right. I feel like that second sip leaned even a little bit more toward the bourbon side of things. Lots of that oak, good barrel spice, and it does have this rye spice characteristic that settles in throughout. It's very herbal and spicy on the back end for sure. A little bit of that lemon kicked up in the middle, But this time I got just a stronger note of caramel too. Just like a nice, richer, sugary kind of experience right in the middle with some caramel. All right, it's developing nicely. It's definitely rich and flavorful. I'll be interested to see if this third sip, how much of the rye and bourbon, experience goes on here. And I don't mean to suggest that this is a bourbon. It's a rye whiskey, obviously, but just the barely legal nature of it does make me think there could be some more of those typical bourbon characteristics. But it's definitely a rye, and it feels like a rye in the mouth, especially the freshness and the poppy quality feels like a rye. All right, let's go in on the third sip. We'll really focus on the full experience and the finish in particular. Cheers. Okay, so still very solid. I did get a little bit more rye there, a little bit more of the mint. It almost has a spearmint quality to it now that I'm just sitting here and having sipped on it. Some rye spice, the oak is there, the brown sugar is there. That came across as caramel in the second sip. This time was a little bit more just like a dry oak and brown sugar. A little bit of that lemon came through, and a touch of that apple as well. It doesn't really go too much more complex than that for me. It's relatively even keel, just kind of very even throughout the whole sip. My one maybe qualm here is just I'm wanting a little bit more staying power with some of the flavors, and I'm wanting a little bit more just uniqueness on each sip. It's kind of settled into a flatter experience that I've expected the flavors. It's delivering on those, but it hasn't really wowed me with different touches throughout each sip. I will say, for $60, it is dang good stuff. It definitely has the presence of age. It's definitely fresh like a rye, brings some of that quality of citrus as well, but it doesn't tend too far in that direction. So if you're typically a bourbon connoisseur, only a bourbon drinker, I don't think this is going to scare you away, and I don't think it's kind of more an offensive rye that has, overwhelming characteristics. It's a pretty nicely balanced experience. My one negative here is it didn't seem to kind of pull me in with interesting notes after 2 sips or 3 sips. Like I'm on the third sip and I'm wanting a little bit more to keep me interested, and it just kind of stays very, very solid. So not necessarily the worst thing in the world that it continues to be a very solid whiskey, but it didn't wow me in different directions. But overall, what do I think? Is it worth your money? Is it worth going out to grab? I think if you're a Knob Creek fan, 100% it's worth hunting down and grabbing. If you're a rye fan, 100% it's worth grabbing, especially at the price point. If you are a little bit wary about rye or just getting into rye and you're kind of interested in this new release, maybe I'd say try a few other rye whiskeys first before you go out and spend $70+ on this bottle. But it's good. It's very, very good. And it's a very solid release. What I'd love to do is compare this directly to some of the other Knob Creek products I have, especially the 12-year-old bourbon. I feel like that is its sort of brother in my mind. Like the 12-year, $70-ish MSRP bourbon versus the 10-year rye would be a really interesting matchup, and we'll probably have to do that soon. Would love to know in the comments below, have you been able to taste this one yet? Has it impressed you? What are you thinking? I'm also interested to give this some more time to open up because I've only had mine for a couple days here, so we'll see how it develops. While you're at it, hit the like button on this video. That's what helps get it out to the most people. And then also, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel, joining us for a lot more relaxing, fun, entertaining, hopefully informative content through the rest of 2024 and beyond. I think that's going to wrap it up, everybody. Until I see you guys again for another video, all I can say is keep drinking good whiskey and cheers.